All right, so we're going to go over fraction operations. Okay, so that means adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. So adding and subtracting have their own set of rules. And then multiplying and dividing have their own set of rules as well. All right, so when you add and subtract, you got to make sure you have the same denominator. All right, so that's what's important. For this one, multiplying and dividing, you do not need the same denominator. Do not need the same denominator. Okay, so these are the two things you got to remember. So first decide, are they asking you to add, subtract, or are they asking you to multiply or divide? If it's add, subtract, you got to make sure the number on the bottom is the same. So we have our numerator and our denominator. The numerator is a top number, denominator is a bottom one. If you have an example, let's say they ask you to do 1 over 2 plus 1 over 2. You have the same denominator, so you can begin. And before you do anything, without even thinking, you look at the denominators. If they're the same, it's going to be the same thing when you add or subtract. You only add in the top, so 1 plus 1 is 2. So 1 half plus 1 half is 2 halves, which is 1 whole. Now, if you see, if we're talking about a circle, half a circle is like that, plus another half a circle, which is going to equal a whole circle because it's 2 halves, right? So that's how fractions work. The reason you need to have the denominator the same when you're putting them together is because we're talking about parts of a whole. So if it's cut into 2 pieces, it's the denominator is 2. If it's cut into 4 pieces, the denominator is 4. If it's cut into 8 pieces, so if you're going to add an eighth plus, let's say, a half, which in a circle, this is a half. That's a half of the circle. You're adding an eighth plus a half. A half is also the same thing as 1, 2, 3, 4 eighths. So 4 eighths equals a half. So that's why we change the denominators when we add. So they ask you to do this one, 1 eighth plus 1 half. Remember, the first thing you do is you look, do you have the same denominator? Because they're asking you to add. So whenever they ask you to add or subtract, you got to make sure, is the number on the bottom the same? Do you have the same denominator? That's the first thing you ask yourself. Is the number the same? No. So we got to change the numbers on the bottom. So since you know 1 half is the same as 4 eighths by looking at this picture, then you can, instead of saying 1 eighth plus a half, I'm going to rewrite the 1 half as 4 eighths. Now I can add them. And remember, once you have the same denominator, without even thinking, this guy's going to be an 8 also, because you're talking about eighths. How many eighths? 1 eighth plus 4 eighths equals 5 eighths. So 1 eighth plus 1 half is the same thing as 1 eighth plus 4 eighths, because 1 half is 4 eighths. As you can see, we drew a circle. We cut it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. So these are eighths. This is an eighth, this is an eighth, this is an eighth, this is an eighth. Together, it's 4 eighths, which equals 1 half. So these fractions are the same. It's just writing in different ways. And adding and subtracting is the most confusing operation for fractions. And subtracting is the same thing. You just got to have the same bottom number. For multiplying and dividing, you don't have to. If you have 1 half times 1 eighth, you can just go straight across. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 8 is 16. So 1 half times 1 eighth is the same thing as 1/16. They're basically asking you, when you do 1 half times an eighth, you're dividing a half you're cutting a half into eighths. And so that's going to equal 1/16. Now, if you're going to divide, let's say we're going to divide 1 half divided by 2/4. When you're dividing, this is a tricky one. the way I'm showing you these algorithms, these calculations, there's no algorithm for when you're dividing 2/4. There's no method. The method that we decided to use was 1/2. You leave the first one alone. You change the division to multiplication, and then you flip this guy. You use its reciprocal. I mean, it means you flip it. So the 4's on the bottom, now it's on the top. The 2's on the top, now it's on the bottom. And now it's a multiplication problem. And when we multiply, we just multiply straight across. So you're going to do 1/4. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. So 4/4 is 1. All right. So that's kind of like something you do got to remember. So recap, adding and subtracting, you must have the same denominator. If you don't, you got to change it. Multiplying and dividing, you do not need the same denominator. Multiply, you multiply straight across. If it's asking you to divide, you got to leave the first fraction alone, change the sign, and flip the fraction. Okay, so let's do a few examples. So number 1, 2/3 plus 1/8. So a quick way to change the denominators, remember, we're asking us to add. First thing you do is look at the denominators. Are the denominators the same? No, they're not. They're different. So you must find the common denominator. Okay, a fast way to do it is we'll multiply this guy and that guy by 1. Because when you multiply something by 1, it doesn't change what it is. 5 times 1 is 5. 10 times 1 is 10. 20 times 1 is 20. So we're going to multiply this by 1, but my 1's going to look, I'm going to pick the way I want my 1 to look. I need these numbers to be the same at the end. So since there's an 8 here, I'm going to multiply this guy by 8/8. Since there's a 3 here, I'm going to multiply this guy by 3/3. Now I'm going to rewrite them. When you multiply, remember, you're asking you to multiply. You go straight across. 8 times 2, 16. 8 times 3, 24. Over here, 1 times 3, 3. 8 times 3, 24. Now we rewrote them to have same denominators. Now we can go ahead and add them. Remember, once you have the same denominators, you don't got to think. You just look. 24 is going to be 24 because you're adding. But you do at the tops. 16 plus 3. And there's your final answer. So common denominators. Cool? Same thing when you're subtracting. Let's say you said 5/7 minus 2/3. So do we have the same denominator? No, we don't. So I'm going to multiply this guy by 1 and this guy by 1. And since I have a 3 here, I want this guy to be 7 times 3. And I put the 3 there as well to create this, because this is 1. 3/3 is 1. 1 times 5/7 is still 5/7. It's just going to look differently. And since you have a 3 over here, you want it to be the same as that. You put a 7. So you put them on opposite sides. You multiply them out. And now on both sides, you have 3 times 7, which is 21. Over here, I have 3 times 5, which is 15. And over here, 2 times 7, which is 14. So now 21, 21, 21. 15 minus 4 is 1, and I'm done. Cool? But if you already have the same denominator, you don't have to multiply anything. You're ready to go. 2, 2, 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 halves, which reduces to 1 and 1/2. All right, so that's adding. Multiplying is the easiest one out of all of them, right? Multiply 5/3 times 2/1. Just go straight across. 5 times 2, 10. 3 times 1, 3. When you reduce it, 3 goes into 10 3 times, and you're left with 1/3. Okay? And lastly, dividing. 5/3 divided by 2/1. Remember, if it says divide, we have to change the sign to multiply. We have to flip this guy. We leave this guy alone. So if it says divide fractions, leave the first fraction alone, change the sign, and use the reciprocal. Flip them. So you haven't done any math yet. All you did was rewrite it to a form you know how to handle. So now 5 times 1 is 5, 3 times 2 is 6, 5, 6. Cool? All right, good luck.